Stop scrolling, don't blink. Because what I'm about to say is not motivational noise, it's a mirror. Most people will hear this and feel uncomfortable. A few will feel exposed. And almost everyone will want to look away before the end. If that's you, stay. Because if you leave now, nothing changes. You go back to your routine, your safe thoughts, your familiar doubts. But if you stay, really stay, there's a chance something shifts. You've been told your whole life to listen to others, to follow the plan, to be realistic, to wait your turn. No one warned you what that waiting would cost. No one told you that years can disappear quietly. That potential doesn't scream when it dies, it fades. That one day you wake up successful on paper and empty inside. And here's the part that hits hard, you already know this. There's a reason this video found you now, not later. Not when you're ready, now. Because somewhere inside you, there's a question you've been avoiding. A voice you keep silencing, a direction you keep postponing. This isn't about motivation. It's about honesty. About facing the difference between the life you're living and the life you keep imagining late at night. By the end of this video, you won't be entertained. You'll be confronted. And that's dangerous. Because once you see clearly, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize the pattern, you can't pretend it's coincidence. Once you hear your own heart, excuses stop working. So if you're comfortable, leave now. But if you're ready to hear something that might change how you think, how you decide, and how you move forward, stay. Listen closely, because this part matters more than most people realize. Before any invention, before any company, before any movement that changed the direction of humanity, there was a moment that looked completely irrational from the outside. A quiet internal moment. One person sensing something before there was evidence for it, before charts, before validation, before approval. That moment is what people later call vision. But in real time, it feels nothing like confidence. It feels like tension. Like standing on unstable ground while everyone around you is asking why you're not choosing the safe path. Your heart knows before the world approves. Not because it's mystical or emotional, but because it processes information differently. Logic works with what already exists. The heart works with what could exist. Logic is excellent at optimizing the present. The heart is designed to sense the future. Think about how often the most important decisions in your life weren't made by spreadsheets or long explanations. You didn't choose a purpose, a calling, or a direction because it was guaranteed. You chose it because something inside you locked into place and said, this matters. Even if you ignored it later. Even if you talked yourself out of it, you felt it first. That feeling isn't random. It's your mind integrating years of subconscious data, observations you didn't consciously record, patterns you noticed but never articulated, questions you've been quietly asking since you were young. When all of that aligns, it doesn't announce itself politely. It shows up as a pull, a pressure, a refusal to go away. And this is where most people disconnect from themselves. Because the world rewards certainty. It rewards explanations that fit neatly into existing frameworks. If you can't immediately explain why something will work, you're told it won't. If you can't show proof before action, you're told to wait. But here's the paradox no one likes to admit. Proof only exists after someone acts without it. If everyone waited for approval, nothing new would ever happen. Every time someone has pushed humanity forward, they did it while being told they were wrong, unrealistic, or irresponsible. Not because they were reckless, but because they were operating on a different timeline. They were responding to a signal others couldn't yet detect. When you listen to your heart early, you're not rejecting logic. You're simply acknowledging that logic lags behind reality. Data is historical, vision is anticipatory. And progress requires people who are willing to move before the data looks comfortable. That's uncomfortable for others, because it exposes a truth they'd rather avoid that they could have listened to, but didn't. So they call it luck, or genius, or insanity, anything except what it really is: courage paired with internal clarity. Your heart doesn't ask for guarantees, it asks for commitment. And commitment is frightening, because once you make it, you can't pretend you didn't know. You can't hide behind confusion anymore. You become responsible for what you sensed. That's why ignoring your heart feels easier in the short term. You get to blend in. You get to say, I was just being practical. But over time, that avoidance has a cost. It shows up as restlessness, as quiet dissatisfaction, as the sense that you're busy but not fulfilled, productive but not aligned. People often think listening to the heart means acting emotionally. It doesn't. It means choosing direction before certainty. It means saying, I don't have all the answers yet, but I know which questions matter. And that's how real work begins. When you commit to a direction that hasn't been validated, you enter a different psychological state. You start learning faster because the stakes are real. You notice details others overlook. Because you're invested, you tolerate failure better, because you understand it as feedback, not judgment. The world tends to underestimate how powerful that shift is. Most people wait to believe until they see results. The people who change things believe first, then work until the results catch up. Not blindly, not arrogantly, but persistently. And yes, sometimes your heart will be wrong about the details. That's fine. Being wrong about execution is how you refine vision. But being wrong about direction is rare when you've genuinely listened. Because direction comes from who you are, not from trends. The danger isn't trusting your heart and failing. The danger is never trusting it and succeeding at something that was never yours to begin with. That kind of success feels hollow. It looks impressive from the outside and empty from the inside. And no amount of external recognition fixes that disconnect. When you listen early, before approval, you accept that misunderstanding is part of the process. That isolation is temporary. That clarity often precedes consensus by years, sometimes decades, and that's okay, because you're not trying to be first to be praised. You're trying to be first to be honest with yourself. That honesty is rare, and rare things always look strange at first. So if you feel drawn towards something you can't fully explain yet, don't dismiss it just because others don't see it. They're not supposed to. They don't have your data. They don't have your questions. They don't have your internal history. You do. Listening to your heart isn't about drama or impulse. It's about alignment, about choosing to live in a way that makes sense to you before it makes sense to the world. And eventually, if you stay with it long enough, the world catches up. It always does. Until then, remember this and let it sit with you. If you wait for approval to begin, you're already too late. Now let's talk about the part no one puts on posters, the part people edit out of interviews, the part that actually determines whether anything meaningful ever happens. Fear, failure, loneliness. Not as obstacles, but as signals. Most people grow up believing that discomfort means something is wrong, that if a path creates anxiety, resistance, or uncertainty, it must be avoided. But that belief is one of the most damaging misconceptions in modern life, because it trains people to retreat at the exact moment growth begins. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When you move toward something meaningful, your nervous system reacts first. Not with excitement, but with fear. Because fear is not a measure of danger, it's a measure of importance. Your brain is designed to protect the familiar. It evolved to keep you alive, not to help you innovate. So when you step outside what you've already mastered, your mind interprets novelty as threat. It doesn't ask whether the risk is worth it, it just sounds the alarm. That alarm feels like doubt, like hesitation, like the voice saying, "And who do you think you are?" And most people obey it without question. But the people who build, discover, and transform things learn something critical early on. Fear is not a stop sign, it's a checkpoint. It asks one question: to continue anyway. Failure works the same way. We treat failure as a verdict on our ability, our intelligence, our worth. But that's not what it is. Failure is data. It's the system responding to an experiment. And if you're doing something that's never been done before, failure is not just likely, it's required. You don't learn by being right the first time, you learn by being wrong in increasingly precise ways. The problem is that modern culture confuses failure with identity. You fail once, and suddenly you're labeled unqualified. You miss a target, and you start questioning your entire direction. But progress doesn't work like that. It never has. Every complex system that functions well today went through a phase of instability. Trial, error, correction, iteration. That's not a flaw in the process, that is the process. The people who succeed long-term are not the ones who avoid failure. They're the ones who don't personalize it. They ask better questions instead of harsher judgments. They say, "What did this teach me?" instead of, "What does this say about me?" That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Then there's loneliness, the quiet one, the one no one warns you about. When you choose a path that isn't widely understood, you will spend time walking alone. Not because others don't care, but because they can't see what you see yet. And humans are social creatures. We take cues from each other. We feel safer when our choices are mirrored back to us. So when they're not, it creates a particular kind of isolation. You can be surrounded by people and still feel disconnected. You can be supported and still feel unseen. That loneliness isn't a punishment. It's a transition state. It's the space between old identity and new reality. And it's temporary if you keep going. Most people quit here. Not because they can't handle hard work, but because they mistake loneliness for a sign they're wrong. They interpret silence as rejection. They assume that if no one else believes yet, belief must be misplaced. But belief doesn't spread instantly. It spreads after evidence appears. And evidence appears after someone stays long enough to create it. There's a psychological cost to being early, and that cost is isolation. But being late has a cost too, and it lasts much longer. The key is understanding that these three experiences, fear, failure, and loneliness, often arrive together. And when they do, they're not telling you to stop. They're telling you that you've crossed a threshold. You're no longer operating in theory. You're in reality. This is where self-trust becomes non-negotiable, not blind confidence, not arrogance, but grounded trust in your ability to learn, adapt, and continue. You don't need to know how everything will work out. You just need to know that you're capable of responding to what happens next. That's resilience. And resilience isn't toughness. It's flexibility paired with direction. People often ask how others keep going when things look bleak. The answer is simpler than it sounds. They don't romanticize the struggle. They don't tell themselves stories about being special. They focus on the work directly in front of them. They reduce the future to the next assessment, the next attempt. Momentum is built that way, quietly, incrementally, without applause. And over time something shifts. Fear becomes familiar, failure becomes informative. Loneliness becomes a sign that you're still early, not that you're wrong. You stop asking, "Is this safe?" and start asking, "Is this necessary?" That's when things accelerate. Because once you accept that discomfort is part of meaningful effort, it loses its power to control you. You stop negotiating with it. You acknowledge it, then move anyway. And here's the part that matters most. The moment you stop fearing failure is the moment you become dangerous, in the best possible way. You become free to try, free to test, free to build without needing immediate validation. That freedom is rare, and it's earned. So if you're in a phase where things feel unstable, where progress feels slow, where doubt shows up daily, pause before you interpret that as a problem. It might be confirmation. You might be exactly where you're supposed to be, because comfort is common. But growth is selective, and the path that feels lonely, uncertain, and difficult is often the one leading somewhere new. Sit with this before you move on. If you're waiting for fear to disappear before you act, you'll wait forever. The ones who change things act while fear is still in the room. Now we arrive at the part that ties everything together, because listening to your heart is meaningless without action. And enduring fear, failure, and loneliness only matters if it leads somewhere. The future does not belong to the comfortable. Comfort is seductive. It feels like safety. It feels like intelligence. It feels like maturity. But comfort is often just stagnation dressed up as wisdom. It's the decision to stay within known boundaries because they're predictable, not because they're right. Human progress has never been driven by people who were satisfied with how things already work. It's been driven by people who were uncomfortable enough to question them, who looked at existing systems and thought, this could be better, even when better didn't yet have a clear definition. Comfort optimizes the present. Boldness invents the future. And the two don't coexist easily. When you choose comfort, you trade potential for certainty. You gain short-term stability at the cost of long-term possibility. You reduce risk, but you also reduce range. Your life becomes efficient but not expansive. Boldness does the opposite. It accepts inefficiency early. It accepts confusion. It accepts the fact that clarity often comes after commitment, not before it. That's a hard concept for people to sit with, because we're taught that smart decisions are the ones where everything is mapped out in advance. But that's only true in environments that already exist. When you're trying to build something new, there is no complete map. You draw it as you move. This is why bold people are often misunderstood. From the outside, their decisions look reckless, but from the inside, they're deeply considered. They've simply accepted a different kind of risk, the risk of uncertainty instead of the risk of regret. Regret is the quiet one. It doesn't show up immediately. It accumulates slowly, through all the moments you chose not to act, all the times you said, someday, instead of now, all the ideas you abandoned because they didn't fit neatly into your current life. Over time, that avoidance hardens into identity. You start believing you're not the kind of person who takes chances, not the kind of person who builds things, not the kind of person who leads change. But that's not who you are. That's who you practice being. Boldness is not a personality trait, it's a behavior, and behaviors are trainable. Every bold act starts small, smaller than people expect. A decision to speak up when it would be easier to stay silent. A decision to start before you feel ready. A decision to prioritize long-term meaning over short-term approval. These moments rarely feel dramatic. They feel awkward, exposed, slightly uncomfortable. That's how you know they matter. The people shaping the future aren't fearless. They're selective. They choose what they're willing to be uncomfortable for. They decide that certain problems are worth their energy, their time, and their reputation. Because once you've felt alignment between your values and your actions, comfort loses its appeal. You realize that ease is overrated, that purpose is more sustaining than security. That effort aimed at something meaningful produces energy instead of draining it. This is where discipline replaces motivation. Motivation is emotional. It comes and goes. Discipline is structural. It keeps you moving when excitement fades. Bold people don't rely on inspiration. They build systems that support forward motion even on uninspired days. They don't wait to feel confident. They let competence build confidence over time. And competence only comes from doing the work, repeatedly, publicly, imperfectly. That's another reason comfort is dangerous. It keeps you invisible. It keeps you from collecting real feedback. It protects your ego, but it starves your growth. The future doesn't reward perfection. It rewards adaptability. When you put your ideas into the world early, you expose them to reality. Reality is harsh, but it's also generous. It gives you information you can't get in isolation. It shows you what works, what doesn't, and what needs to change. Boldness accelerates learning. Comfort delays it. This isn't just about careers or innovation, it's about how you live, how honestly you speak, how deliberately you choose, how willing you are to let go of outdated versions of yourself, the version that needed approval, the version that avoided risk, the version that confused stability with fulfillment. Letting go of those identities can feel like loss, but it's actually subtraction, and subtraction creates space. Space for better questions, space for deeper focus, space for work that actually matters to you. The people who shape what comes next don't have more talent than everyone else. They just made a different agreement with discomfort. They decided that temporary instability was a fair price for long-term impact. They understood something fundamental: comfort keeps things running. Boldness changes direction, and direction matters more than speed. You don't need to move fast, you need to move intentionally. Even small steps taken consistently in the right direction compound over time. That's how futures are built. Not in bursts, but in sustained effort aligned with vision. So if you're standing at a point where the safe option and the meaningful option are not the same, pay attention. That moment is rare, and it's revealing. The safe option will keep you busy. The meaningful option will change you. And the world doesn't need more people who are merely busy. It needs people willing to choose the harder path when it leads somewhere new. Sit with this before you move on. Comfort maintains what exists. Boldness creates what doesn't. And the future will always belong to those willing to choose creation over ease.